Chapter 16, World War I, 1910 to 1919. Woodrow Wilson is our president. He becomes president in 1913 with the New Freedom Platform. Wilson and the Revolution in Mexico. In 1914, American sailors visiting the city of Tampico, Mexico, were arrested after entering a restricted area. They were quickly released by the government, but the commander wanted a full apology from Mexico, but they refused. Wilson saw this as an opportunity to overthrow the leader of Mexico, Huerta, and anti-American riots broke out in Mexico. Tensions continued until 1917, when Wilson had to pull out of Mexico due to World War I. During this time, there was a lot of militarism and alliances. Alliances are groups of friends or countries that support one another. One alliance was the Triple Alliance, where Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy supported one another. And the other was the Triple Entente, which was France, Britain, and Russia supporting each other, which eventually turns into the U.S. and Italy entering that alliance. Nationalism is very important in many countries. The Balkan people wanted their freedom. They were formerly controlled by the Ottoman Empire and currently controlled by the Austria-Hungarian Empire. In June of 1914, the Austria-Hungarian Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife visit the Balkans, specifically Sarajevo, the home of the Serbs who wanted their freedom. A terrorist, Gavrilo Princip of the Black Hand terror group, kills the Archduke and his wife Sophie. Black Hand wanted Serbia to have freedom from Austria-Hungary's empire rule. The assassination triggers the alliances to declare war against each other. And before long, Germany is fighting on two fronts, one with Russia and one with Britain and France. Propaganda was used during this time to help influence people's opinion. You can see some of the posters that were created. America enters the war. During this time, the British were inspecting all cargo to stop Germany from getting war supplies. The German U-boats, or submarines, were sinking American cargo ships going to Britain. They then sank the British passenger ship Lusitania, killing 128 Americans, and they sunk a French ship, the Sussex. The Germans also sent a telegram to Mexico, asking Mexico to side with them, and when Germany won the war, they would give Mexico all lost territory in the United States. This angered the Americans. Finally, war is declared, and America enters World War I, April 2nd, 1917. On the home front, the War Industries Board has to make the war materials. Many people decide to grow their own gardens and have meatless Thursdays so that food can be shipped to the soldiers. The Fuel Administration asks people to use less coal and oil so more can be used for the war, and daylight savings time is started to save energy. The government raises income tax to pay for the war and sells government bonds. Government bonds are used to help pay the war, and after a few years, you could turn the bond in and receive the amount you paid plus interest. The National War Labor Board gave unions more benefits so they would not stop production. Women work in factories. Many African Americans migrate from the north to the south, from the south to the north to work in factories, and Mexicans migrate to the northern U.S. cities to work in factories. At this time, the Selective Service Act was created. It was a lottery system. 2.8 Americans were drafted, but over 2 million people did volunteer to serve. Some of these groups, the African Americans, served with valor in the 92nd and 93rd Infantry, and in the Harlem Hellfighters 369th Division. Women served as nurses, as secretaries, and on the radio. It was a bloody conflict with trench warfare. It was an area called No Man's Land in between the trenches with barbed wire on each side. New military technology was used. Poison gas attacks were used. And gas masks had to be created for both soldiers and horses and dogs. Tanks were used. Planes were used for the first time. And Zeppelins and hot air balloons were used for observation. Americans arrive in France. One of the first battles that they are part of is the Argonne Forest Battle. It lasts 2 months and lots of heavy fighting. Some of the heroes are Alvin York, Eddie Rickenbacker, African American Harlem Hellfighters of the 369th Infantry. And finally, the war ends on November 11th of 1918 at 11 a.m. President Wilson decides he's going to go to help ensure a good peace treaty. Here is a map of the new countries that were created after World War I. The treaty made Germany lose land. Germany had to admit that it started the war. Germany had to pay damages or reparations to France and Britain for war damages. They had to reduce the size of their army and navy, and they were not allowed in the peace negotiation. President Wilson was only allowed to present one item in the peace treaty, and that was for a League of Nations, which was to hopefully be an organization to prevent future wars, but never got off the ground. The war's impact: inflation occurred, which is rising of prices after the war, which led to strikes. Seattle, Boston, steel workers all went on strike. Cost of living rose for food, clothing, and shelter. There were race riots, and there was lots of racism still in the United States, especially in Texas, Washington, D.C., and Chicago.